Let's turn to the federal deficit, 7.1. And as you now, what this particular chart has, the blue line is federal revenues, the red line is expenditures, and the green line, which is very hard to see up here on this chart, but you might be able to see a little better on yours, is the surplus or deficit. Who's good in arithmetic here? Joanne. When the green line is above zero, are we running a surplus or a deficit? When the green line is above zero, is that a surplus or a deficit? Well, I mean, as a matter of principle. That's a surplus. Green line is below zero, we've got a deficit. Everybody see that? So anytime the blue line is higher than the red line, which means the receipts are greater than the expenditures, like in the year 2000, we're running the S word, surplus. Whereas, like in the year 2005, if the whereas in, oh my gosh, it was reversed. Is that right? Well, all right, let's start over. Right, it was mislabeled. Okay, let's start over. In this case, the red line, of course, is the revenues, right? And the blue line is the expenditures. Does everybody see this? It was reversed. My fault. So, in this case, it's the red line that's the revenues and the blue line that's the expenditures. So, Rebecca, in the year 2000, when the red line is above the blue line, are we running a surplus or a deficit?
Deficit.
That's right, we're running a surplus. And
Exactly.
that's what I thought you said. And listen, we all make mistakes.
Because
So,
you can't keep the blue in the midst.
it's my fault. It's my fault. Okay. Now, whereas in the year 2005, obviously the expenditures are greater than the revenues. Everybody see that? The labeling was reversed. Okay, now, you can see that with every recession, the receipts fall. Why do the receipts or revenues fall with recession? It's hard to collect taxes when folks' income is falling. So, when folks' income is falling, they pay less taxes. Also, if there are tax cuts, that'll do it too. Now, question. Right now, are we cutting taxes? Yes. Are we increasing expenditures? Yes. So you tell me, what's the future hold in store for the federal government? Surpluses or deficits?
It's gonna be
Deficits. Large or small? Big. How big? How big do you think? More than $1 trillion, right? More than $1 trillion, maybe $2 trillion. Who knows, right? We'll see what happens. And if it's $1 trillion, then the green line is down to here, isn't it? If it's more, it's down even further. And so therefore the expenditure line keeps on heading north very quickly, and the revenue line does what? The revenue line heads south. But keep the biggest issue in mind. Why is this happening? It's happening because the private sector spending has collapsed, and especially the private borrowing. The borrowing, does everybody understand? The borrowing supported the most dynamic kind of spending, the spending that increased the most rapidly. And that melted away. And so those kinds of spending collapsed. Let me put it in perspective. If you go to the grocery store, is that particularly dynamic? No. Not many people borrow money to buy groceries. So groceries, they don't grow very rapidly. They don't fall much in recession. The groceries keep on going up. Almost like medical expenditures, they just keep on going up. But there are certain key elements in our society or in our economy that have the ability to grow rapidly and contract rapidly. Residential construction is one of them, for instance. Automobile production is another, for instance. Business investment in plant and equipment is another. And those can be supported by borrowing, and they can grow very quickly. So therefore, what was happening to our economy when the private borrowing was growing very quickly? Well, the private spending was growing quickly, and that was a big boom, right? And now you can see what happened. The private collapse. So unless we're going to have a very, very severe recession or allow the economy to slide into depression, someone has got to go out there and borrow and spend. Now you're going to say, well, Mike, come on. I mean, does it have to be that way? I'm not saying it has to be that way. I'm saying it is that way. That's the way the whole thing has evolved, right? The private spending is supported by private borrowing in our economy. Now, when the private borrowing and spending collapse, what's going to take up the slack? You see? And that's why we have the federal government stepping in. Now, I understand it's a matter of ideology and a matter of ideological dispute. But setting that aside momentarily, that's what's going on. Now, will the federal government's borrowing and spending be able to make up the total shortfall in the private sector? Maybe not. That's why we're having this recession and the unemployment. In a period like World War II, when there was massive federal borrowing and spending, of course we had full employment. But it's only an experience like wartime which will motivate us to have massive increases in borrowing and spending. We're not going to have massive increases in borrowing and spending now, although it seems like it. But they're really not massive. They're really still incremental. And they will, of course, prevent the economy from slipping into an even worse ditch, a deeper ditch. Everybody get it? Does everybody see the relationship here? And that's why we started out with the housing, the home sales, because that's ground zero for the problem. And we started with a history of that, right? We said the Federal Reserve, in a way, contributed to that, and we ended up with this problem. But there was more than that, right? It had to do with the balance sheet and the private sector going nuts and pushing that balance sheet and the liabilities further and further and further, right? And chasing the increase in asset values with more and more liabilities, more borrowing, more spending, until finally the home prices just bore no relationship to the underlying possible rents those properties could generate, and then the whole thing collapsed. Okay, so you can say, well, why don't people just go out and borrow and spend now? Well, they can't. Does everybody understand? We've now got ourselves in a jam. The assets have shrunk, the net worth has shrunk, the liquidity is gone out of that. There's no liquidity left in it. The liabilities are terrific, and that's why the federal government is stepping in to fill the breach, see? And that's left us here now.